Hey, everybody who's on the line, we're going to get started here in a couple minutes. We're just making sure that we've got everyone who's planning on joining us for the presentation this morning. All right, Jessica, it looks like it's been pretty stable with who's coming in the room. So why don't we go ahead and get started, and anyone who joins us later will let in.
Okay, sounds great. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jess Hoy. I am the chief of the Relevancy Branch at Missouri Department of Conservation. I think most of the folks who are joining us are likely internal staff from here at MDC, but we might have some members of the public as well. So just welcome, everyone. Wanted to give you a little bit of background before we start diving into the survey results. This is a project, as you can see, that was done by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, AFWA, who contracted with Virginia Tech to help us do the research on these projects. And we also were taking a look at a number of things across the country and in regions. So there was initially a steering group of folks who were brought together from various fish and wildlife agencies around the country. So there were 16 of us on that steering committee working with an executive committee and then the researchers here at Virginia Tech to make sure that we were designing what we felt was a really strong survey and that could be purposed across all the states where this was being delivered. So there was first a national level survey, then there was a regional level survey, and then some of the states like Missouri chose to buy into getting a state level survey. So this has really been going on for a couple of years, all this work behind the scenes. And so now today, for the first time, we're going to hear about the results of the wildlife viewing survey here specifically in Missouri. And what I think will be interesting to see is, do some of the responses track with recent surveys we've done, whether it be our conservation monitor or the relevancy survey that we did statewide last February 2022. So really excited to be here today after this amount of time, and really appreciate the help of the researchers from Virginia Tech, Ashley Dayer and Emily Sinkelauer, both on the line, and they'll be presenting the results today. So Ashley and Emily, anything you'd like to add?
Thanks so much, Jess. Appreciate it. And we're happy to get started with the presentation. You gave a great background there, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
All right. So great to be joining you all. I've collaborated with Missouri Department of Conservation on a few different projects. So it's nice to be able to see some of the familiar faces, or familiar names at least, again here. And excited to be sharing, as Jess said, the results for your state that have been a long time coming. So what I wanted to point out to everybody is that we have completed a report that goes along with this presentation. The report goes into a great bit of detail about all of the results related to the wildlife viewer survey for your state. We only have an hour and a half here with you, plenty of time we want to save for questions as well, so we can't go into all the detail. So we're going to highlight what we think is most important for you to hear today, but you might have really specific interests, or you might want to look at the specific results on a certain set of items that we talk about today. So you can either grab the link from the chat where Emily has placed it, or you can hold up your phone and grab the QR code so that you have a copy of that report to dig into more afterwards. I also want to thank the folks who've worked on this project with me. Emily, who's on the line here today, was the lead author on this presentation and has been the grad student lead throughout this project and ongoing phases of it as well. Morgan Carnes was an undergraduate researcher who worked with Emily and not only helped with tables and figures, but also started to work on some of the presentation of results too. She has gone on and graduated, so isn't able to join us here today. And then Christy Patotsky is a PhD student who has worked on the state level reports and collaborated with Emily on all of these as well. So a great group of folks who put in so much effort to this. So I'm really grateful for being able to work with them. Okay, so let's talk about what we hope to accomplish with this webinar. We're focusing on the findings from your state to give you a profile of wildlife viewers in Missouri. This is meant to be like a general population of wildlife viewers in Missouri, and I'll talk a little bit about how we defined that in a minute here. And we're hoping that that can help MDC explore, and I should say MDC and partners or others interested in the state, explore how wildlife viewers can be supported in their passion of wildlife viewing, how it's possible to broaden the relevance of a state agency to wildlife viewers who do not hunt and fish and maybe have as much connection with the state agency, and then also how it might be possible to co-develop or develop financial support opportunities for wildlife viewers who might be interested in contributing to conservation, especially programming that would benefit their interests within the state. So let's start by talking a little bit more about the survey itself and who the population is that was involved in it and why we went the direction that we did with the survey. So wildlife viewers, as I said, were our focus, and we defined wildlife viewing based upon the National Survey of Hunting, Fishing, and Wildlife-Related Recreation, which has been conducted by the Department of Interior and other partners within the U.S. for many, many years. So we wanted to be consistent with that to provide state agencies with information about the same group of people that they'd been hearing about in those other surveys, but they didn't have the full extent of information about those people that they needed in order to be able to work with them. So we defined wildlife viewing as closely observing, feeding, and photographing wildlife, visiting natural parks and natural areas, visiting parks, not national parks, and natural areas to observe, feed, and photograph wildlife, and then also maintaining plantings in natural areas for the benefit of wildlife. I do want to call out as well, the focus was on intentional wildlife viewing or for the primary purpose of wildlife watching. So simply noticing wildlife while you're doing something else, like being out in your garden and just happening to see a hummingbird go by, wouldn't be what we would consider wildlife viewing. We were interested in making sure that we got people who were intentionally involved in wildlife viewing. While the other ways of interacting with wildlife are certainly important, it might be gateways to this more intentional wildlife viewing. The focus was on people who would really consider themselves wildlife viewers in this way or involved in wildlife viewing in this more purposeful way. So probably a lot of you are aware that there are trends in wildlife-related recreation that lead state agencies across the country to be really interested in how they can work with wildlife viewers more purposefully. In Missouri, there's many people, 1.6 million people who viewed wildlife as of a state-specific survey in 2011. So we'd expect that number to be even higher now based upon what we're seeing in national level trends where it's been tracked, that there are a growing population of wildlife viewers. That purple line that you see on my graph here is the increase in wildlife viewers across the US over the last couple of decades. And you can see that there was a big jump in participation from 2011 to 2016. And a lot of that comes from around the home wildlife viewing. And that's a theme that you're going to hear across this presentation of people viewing wildlife near to where they live. At the same time, hunting and angling rates have declined or remained stable and are at a much lower rate of the population than wildlife viewers. Of course, they're really important constituents to state fish and wildlife agencies, and in many states provide a great deal of funding. But of course, in states' interest in being relevant to a broader population, it seems that wildlife viewers are also really important to be considering. As we worked with that steering committee that Jess was mentioning, we asked them, why is your state interested in studying wildlife viewers so that we could make sure we were providing the type of information that was relevant to their interests. So of course, they brought up this component that the viewers are growing in number and also their potential influence because there's more of them in the states. So understanding them better is really important. Many of them also mentioned that it can be hard to reach out to wildlife viewers and understand them or survey them or hear from them. Whereas with hunters and anglers, state fish and wildlife agencies have databases for the people who've bought licenses. There's not a similar way in most states that they hear from or that they have connections with a broader swath swath. Now, of course, if your state agency is also managing parks, you may have parks passes information, or if your state agency also has an access permit and promotes viewing, you may also hear, but it's still a subset of the wildlife viewers, unlike the connection with hunters and anglers. And then while I said that there's this national survey of hunting, fishing, and wildlife related recreation, it focuses on participation rates and the type of viewing that you do, like, is it around the home or is it at a distance, or how much money did you spend on it? It doesn't get in as much to viewers' thoughts, their preferences, their behaviors, and some other types of demographics of those viewers as well. So there was an interest in learning more about wildlife viewers that could be relevant to developing programs and connections with them. And then allowing then state agencies to better serve and communicate with viewers and other underserved groups that were thought to be more likely to be within the wildlife viewer category than maybe in the hunting and angling category. And then also connecting viewers to mechanisms to contribute financially. In some states like yours, where you have a sales tax component that comes back to your state, there's a mechanism for a much broader group of the population to contribute financially to your agency than in other states where really hunting and angling permits are the only way. If you're interested in hearing more about what's already known about wildlife viewers, we recommend that you take a look at this literature review, which was one of the first steps of our national level project. Emily and Kelsey, another master's student, put this together by reviewing what's already known from studies across the US and in some cases beyond about wildlife viewers, so that we could make sure that we were building on the existing literature, but they did it in a way that was meant to be really useful for people who currently or hope to in the future work with wildlife viewers. So there's headings in there that make you be able to quickly find what you're interested in, like to what extent are wildlife viewers involved in conservation? And then you can go to that section, and they've made sure to really just pull out the key things from the research and in an easy to digest format. And then if you wanted to go look at an actual study that it was based on, you could check that out. There's a long references section in the back. So again, Emily's put that link in the chat, or you can use the QR code here. After the presentation, we will also be sending out an email with the links to everything that we have provided during this presentation. And it will go to everybody who's registered for the presentation. And then finally, I want to mention that another resource that might be of interest are the national and regional level results. While we're going to focus on the Missouri level results today, you may be interested in how does Missouri compare to the stats for your region or for the nation. And that's a place to check on that. The other thing that might be of interest to you here is in the recommendations section of this report. We have about 8 different examples of programs that state agencies are involved in across the country that are in line with the types of recommendations that we're making to provide success stories that might be of interest to other states. A few of those we're going to call out during the presentation today, but you might wish to take a look at all of those. All right, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Emily, who's going to talk about the methods that we used for this project.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Jess and Ashley. It's been great having the chance to work with Jess and Amy on the project over the last year or so, and we hope that you find these results really interesting. Right now, I'll talk a little bit more about our survey and then share some demographics. So we conducted a panel survey, and specifically in Missouri, we received 1,012 complete responses. The survey was conducted online from October to December of 2021, and it consisted of 117 different survey questions. So we have a lot of data to share with you all today. After obtaining consent from the respondents to participate in the survey, we asked this screening question: in which, if any, of the following forms of wildlife viewing have you participated in over the past 5 years? And like Ashley said, if someone didn't select any of those behaviors, they were not sampled. In this study, we were really interested in studying wildlife viewers only and weren't looking at other recreation behaviors. The survey reviewed wildlife viewers' demographic characteristics, their wildlife viewing behaviors and interests, so the types of wildlife they viewed, their duration, location, and frequency of participating in wildlife viewing, a little bit of their overlap with other outdoor recreation, including hunting and angling, their level of specialization, so their skill level and owning equipment, their wildlife viewing related expenditures. We looked at wildlife viewing trips and then other wildlife viewing expenses, and you can take a look at that in the report. And then their barriers and social support and participation, which we'll be diving into a lot more today, and their likelihood of participating in different conservation behaviors. And we also wanted to closely examine the relationships that wildlife viewers have with the MDC. And to do so, we looked at their familiarity with, perceptions of, and trust in the agency. We also asked about their experiences with programs and services offered by the MDC. We took a close look at their past financial contributions to their agency. We also examined their likelihood to support the MDC financially and through different forms of conservation behaviors in the future. And finally, we also looked at their preferred forms of viewing support and communication methods from the agency. And this survey was a panel survey. Online panel surveys are these platforms of individuals that are recruited to take a survey, and then they're compensated financially. You may have seen an ad to take a survey or participate in these projects on a television channel or social media. Respondents are compensated financially for their participation. And as social scientists, we use a few things like attention checks, time limits, and quotas to ensure we have really high quality responses to the survey. Now, first of all, attention checks. We used about 12 of them. You can see them in the appendix of the report. And these are pairs of contradicting statements. So one pair might be, I strongly trust the MDC, and I don't trust the MDC. If someone says they strongly agree to both of those statements, or if they strongly disagree with both of those statements, that's kind of a little red flag to us that they might be speeding through the survey and not paying as much attention. If someone failed 2 or more of these attention checks or paired contradicting statements, we remove them from the final count of the survey, which means they weren't included in that number 1012, I believe it was, at the beginning of the presentation of complete responses. We also established a minimum completion time based on some pilots we did with the survey company. And if people were below that threshold, they were also removed. So they're not counted in that 1012 wildlife viewers we surveyed, and the results aren't included today. The third tool we used was quotas. Now, quotas are when you match the demographics of your survey respondents against a known population. And in this survey, we again turned to the 2016 National Survey of Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation and looked at their age, gender, and education of respondents for wildlife viewers across the country. And then we programmed the survey responses to match. So we only received about a half split of men and women. The mean age of our respondents were 49 years old, and 9% of them had obtained more than 4 years of higher education. And once we conducted the survey, we began analyzing it. The data is now available online, and I just put the link in the chat. But what you'll see in the report and here today is some descriptive statistics, a lot of tests comparing consumptive and non-consumptive wildlife viewers. And if you'd like to do your own tests, the data set is available online. Now, as we began this project, and even before I came to Virginia Tech, I was working with wildlife viewing in the National Park Service. And I had this really kind of solid image of a wildlife viewer who someone would come to the park with their binoculars, and then there would be a hunter or an angler, and they would be in the stream, they would be fishing, they would be off the park, and they would be hunting elsewhere. I didn't really think that there was an overlap between these wildlife viewers and these hunters and anglers. But once we started getting the data from this project and looking at it, we realized that there is actually quite a lot of overlap. So in this study, we defined non-consumptive wildlife viewers as individuals who have not participated in hunting or angling in the past 5 years, while consumptive wildlife viewers have hunted or fished in the past 5 years. And in Missouri, I believe just about 50%, so 46% of all the respondents that we surveyed were consumptive wildlife viewers, meaning that they also participated in hunting and or angling. We'll take a closer look here, and you can see that fishing or angling has a little bit of a stronger relationship with wildlife viewing. 32% of all our respondents, participated in fishing and wildlife viewing. 4% of all respondents participated in hunting and wildlife viewing. And 20% of all our respondents were very busy, and they participated in hunting, angling, and wildlife viewing. And this slide is our first kind of screenshot of results, and I wanted to walk you through it a little bit more. In the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a box that has that statistically significant difference. So that's just a test to show us if there's similarities or differences between the numbers. In this graphic you see here, that black bar with the hatching is the statewide results. So that's everybody, including the hunters and the non-consumptive viewers. The green bar throughout the presentation will be consumptive wildlife viewers. So they're hunters, anglers, and wildlife viewers. And the purple bar is non-consumptive wildlife viewers. And in Missouri, we found that over half of all wildlife viewers, specifically 56%, live in urban areas or a small city. And this is something we'll come back to at the very end of the presentation. And slightly more non-consumptive wildlife viewers lived in an urban area, and slightly more consumptive wildlife viewers lived in a rural area. We also wanted to review those behaviors or the forms of wildlife viewing that people are participating in Missouri. And again, on the bottom left, you'll see a key just to understand those asterisks. Whenever you see those, that means there is a statistically significant difference between consumptive and non-consumptive wildlife viewers. So in Missouri, the most popular form of wildlife viewing is visiting parks and natural areas to participate in wildlife viewing, followed by feeding wild birds. Again, we saw similar levels of interest in these behaviors, but whenever a difference did occur, it meant that slightly more consumptive wildlife viewers participate in that activity than non-consumptive. With that, I'll pass things back to Ashley, who's going to share 5 key insights from the study.
Thanks, Emily. We're going to be organizing the rest of the presentation around these 5 key insights, and showing you not only what the insights are that we think are really important, but then also the data behind that. So we would recommend, based upon these survey results, that if Missouri is interested in better supporting wildlife viewers, the focus could be on, 1, providing more wildlife viewing information and access, and I'll show you in a minute here the justification for that, promoting around the home viewing opportunities, and then developing social support networks for wildlife viewers. Additionally, it seems important, based upon the results, that Missouri could focus on broadening relevance to wildlife viewers who do not hunt or fish, and then also developing financial contribution opportunities for wildlife viewers. And I'll give you some more guidance about what the results would say would be the direction for those 2 things. Okay, so let's talk first about this information and access side of things. We gave folks who are participating in the survey a whole array of options of the types of ways that they would like to be supported in their wildlife viewing activities by MDC. And they said that these were the most common things that came up as ways that people would like to be supported. And as you can see, 4 of them have the word information in them. So more information about where to go viewing, more information about wildlife in Missouri, more information about how to view, and then also more information about where and when to view, where there's no hunting going on. Additionally, that middle item in yellow is more access to places to view wildlife. And I'm going to come back to that in a little bit here to talk about it more. And if you want to see the whole list, it's available in the report. I also have it here as a copy in the figure. It's a lot to read. Those more info ones are all coming up as the top few. But you can also see that equally important as that last more info one, depending on which group we're talking about, is more accessible features in wildlife viewing locations. So we're also going to come back to that issue of accessibility and serving disabled viewers later in the presentation as well. But you can see some things like more non-research volunteer opportunities are not of interest to as many people. Only about 10% of the viewers were interested in that. And very few people said that they were interested in nothing that MDC could do to support their wildlife viewing activities. So there is a lot of demand here for ways that the agency could better support viewing activities. Okay, so we see that information is really important. People were asked as well about a whole array, again, I'll show you that list of ways that they could receive communications from MDC. And printed materials and the website and email updates came up as the top item. In other states where we've had similar results, it's been surprising to folks that people want printed materials. that sort of seems like out of fashion right now in many ways to provide a brochure, but it still is something that's in demand based upon these results. And then of course the website as well. You may be wondering about more up and coming ways of approaching viewers like YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or Twitter. And you can see those in the middle here, 30% or less of people being interested in receiving information that way. Now, what I will say is that we haven't done an analysis in all the states or in your state of all the responses by demographics, but I would guess, based upon other work that we've done, that this is probably one that's very much aligned with age differences, and that you might see with some younger demographics that some of the more social media aligned approaches might be of interest. That's something with the data set that we've provided to you all. If communications staff are interested in digging in more, there's plenty of opportunity to do analysis of these ways that people want to hear from you by different groups of people. Okay, so we know that wildlife viewers in Missouri want more information about wildlife and turn to your website and your materials. The types of wildlife that they're interested in learning more about, or that they're interested, I guess, in general, in observing, photographing, and feeding, and thus we'd expect that they'd be interested in info about, are primarily birds and land mammals. You can see that's what 80% of people said that they're interested in viewing. But also reptiles and fish come out as high, particularly for the consumptive wildlife viewers. And yes, we recognize that you don't have marine mammals in your state to view, but we were not asking people about only their viewing in Missouri. We were asking them about their wildlife viewing in general. So we understand that that might not be your top priority for sharing information. And did want to point out, probably many of you are familiar with your website. You do have a section specific to wildlife on your website. It doesn't specifically call out viewing though, which is the case in some states. It might be something to consider. But you have featured topics in here about identifying birds, attracting hummingbirds, ways to enjoy birds on your property, which is quite useful to folks. You might simply think about, though, how to also add information about mammals, because we know that mammals were of interest to people, and these seem to all be focused, at least from the initial part that you receive information about, on birds. And so that could be a place for growth in your website. Another thing to think about with these communications is how skilled wildlife viewers are in your state. And I think that in many states, the state agency is used to collaborating with and hearing from birding clubs or the Herp Club or the Ornithological Society in their state. So they think of wildlife viewers as having a high level of expertise. In fact, though, if you look at this general population of wildlife viewers, which is who we surveyed in this project, 61% of your state wildlife viewers identify as beginner or novice, and it's the majority of the population of wildlife viewers are in beginner, novice, or intermediate. And the other thing to point out is you'll notice that purple bar is a bit higher on all of these, with the beginner, novice having even more in that non-consumptive category. So certainly, as you think about providing information to the broad public, making sure that that information works for a beginner, novice, or intermediate viewer is really a worthwhile thing to keep in mind. Now let's get back to that item about people wanting more access to viewing in your state. So the question that we have, and we found this in a lot of states, the question that we have is this a lack of awareness about where the sites are for wildlife viewing, or is it a lack of access? Like it's just hard for people to get there. You can see here, you all do have a really extensive birding trail network. Is it that people aren't aware about the birding trail network, and that's why they're saying they need more places to view, or is that still not close enough to where they are? The great thing about your birding trail network is that you also do have a lot of those sites near urban areas, which is not the case in other states' wildlife viewing areas. So I think that making sure that folks are aware of this birding trail network and that it feels like a place that's welcoming to everyone is useful. And then maybe also thinking about expanding it, as they have in some states, to a birding and wildlife viewing trail and calling out things like mammals or herps or fish that people might be able to view there could be worthwhile. The other thing that we wanted to mention is that 2 of the 3 wildlife viewers, or 2 of 3 of every wildlife viewer in your state participate in viewing on state managed areas. So that's certainly a place also to be connecting people with wildlife viewing resources, since that is tied in with your agency. Of course, broadly, we said state managed areas, though, not just specific to MDC. The other thing we wanted to mention, though, is that the top 3 barriers to people's participation in wildlife viewing, or further extent of participation in wildlife viewing, are distance to viewing locations, lack of free time, and financial costs. And I think it could be argued that these 3 items are also very intertwined. Not having a lot of free time means that you don't want to go far for viewing, or not having the finances means that you also might not want to go far for wildlife viewing. So to the extent that people can be connected with as many viewing opportunities as they can in very close proximity to their home is really worthwhile for overcoming these barriers. So on that topic of around the home wildlife viewing, I'm going to turn things over to Emily, who's going to talk about the interests in viewing right where people live.
Thank you, Ashley. Promote around the home viewing is an excellent opportunity for growth for MDC. On this slide, I just grabbed a screenshot from your website about attracting monarch butterflies, and this is an excellent example of that, maintaining habitat or plantings for the benefit of wildlife, and how that's one form of wildlife viewing that people might be interested in and want more information about. So we found that 80% of wildlife viewers in Missouri participate in viewing on their own home or property. And that's roughly a similar number between both the non-consumptive and consumptive wildlife viewers. The second most common location in Missouri that people turn to for wildlife viewing is state managed areas, followed by locally managed areas. So this really emphasizes, especially that gap. There's an 18% difference between around the home or state managed areas, shows the importance of providing information and providing ways that people can connect with wildlife viewing around their own home or property. So our take-home message from this is you can support around the home wildlife viewing by encouraging different forms of habitat and broader conservation behaviors. So as a screen grab, we asked people, how likely would you be to participate in these conservation activities with or in the support of MDC in the next 5 years if you had the opportunity to do so? And 3 of those behaviors were related to habitat management, including cleaning up trash or litter, enhancing wildlife habitat, like for the monarch butterflies, or collecting data on wildlife or habitat, which you might know as community or citizen science. And I think, and if we could go back a slide, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention something. Thank you. And on this topic of cleaning up trash or litter, we've seen this again and again throughout a lot of states that's the #1 behavior people are interested in participating in. And this could be an opportunity if the agency does ever host cleanup days or clean up the lake days or stream days. You could bring information, that printed materials about wildlife in the state. And that's a great way to kind of grab people while they're out with the agencies and give them that information about wildlife that we know that they're interested in. Thank you. And our third takeaway is the importance of developing social support networks for wildlife viewing. We asked about 4 different groups that can support wildlife viewing participation. And in Missouri, we found that wildlife viewers feel like they're getting a lot of support from their family and friends, but not as much from their peers, and definitely not as much from their mentors. So we identify that mentor role as one that Missouri could potentially step into and help to foster through mentorship. We wanted to take a closer look at this through examining the ethno-racial identity of wildlife viewers. And I wanted to, again, draw your attention to this box here on the bottom left of your screen. It says the ethno-racial identity of wildlife viewers in Missouri was 83% white only and 17% BIPOC. So BIPOC means Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And those are survey respondents who identified as a non-white ethno-racial identity or as white and another ethno-racial identity. And you might be wondering, how does this compare to the US Census data on Missouri? We found that there's a huge gap in representation. Again, in this survey, we found about 17% of wildlife viewers were BIPOC, but 38% of the entire population, according to the 2020 US Census in Missouri, is BIPOC. And the reason that we might not be seeing as much representation in Missouri could be this concept called the don't loop, which states if you don't meet others who are engaged in a particular activity, the odds are you will not take interest in that activity yourself. And that's the importance of having those mentorships roles or someone who looks like you behaving in activity so you can feel a little bit more welcomed to participate as well. We have a great case study from this role from the South Carolina DNR, or Department of Natural Resources. And a little bit more information about this is available in the national and regional report. But just at the high level, in 2015, the South Carolina DNR began a community engagement program, and they hired a Hispanic outreach coordinator who developed bilingual resources and outreach strategies targeted to the Hispanic population in South Carolina. This program proved to be a really large success, and in 2021, they began replicating this program with a similar strategy to reach the Black population and help connect them more to nature and wildlife viewing in South Carolina. Another audience to consider for inclusivity in wildlife viewing is people with disabilities. In the survey, we define disabilities as people who experience accessibility challenges, which were the difficulties someone experiences in interacting with or while using the physical or social environment while trying to engage in a meaningful activity, such as wildlife viewing. This may be a result of mobility challenges, blindness or low vision, intellectual or developmental disabilities, mental health illness, being deaf or hard of hearing, or other health concerns. And in Missouri, we found that 36% of all respondents experienced quite a bit, or a great deal of accessibility challenges when wildlife viewing. Nationwide, about a quarter, 1 in 4 Americans lives with some form of a disability, but they can be kind of underrepresented and underincluded in wildlife viewing and outdoor recreation. One avenue that we wanted to spotlight is this birdability map that is supported by Audubon. Birdability is an organization dedicated to promoting inclusive birding for people with disabilities. And this map, I'll put the link in the chat when I finish talking. It has trails throughout the state of Missouri that people with disabilities have gone to and birded at and thought were really accessible and inclusive for them. So one step that the agency could consider is adding trails on this map that are designed to be more accessible, or potentially spotlighting this resource within the website. And the final piece that I wanted to talk about today is the option of including tips about accessible wildlife viewing within the agency website. There's a little bit of accessibility information on the MDC website I was able to find that were primarily about track chairs and who to call if you wanted an accommodation. But this could be a great place to put a little bit more information about how to participate in wildlife viewing if you have a disability. As we've seen, it's a considerable population in Missouri. And with that, I think I will pass things back to Ashley, who will close things out.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. And I'm sorry I was bouncing in and out there with the screen. I was having a computer technology issue, which I hopefully won't have as I wrap things up here. So last 2 insights related to broadening relevance to wildlife viewers first. Consumptive and non-consumptive viewers really did seem to have different perceptions of and experience with MDC. And a key thing that comes across in a lot of the different components of the survey is that non-consumptive viewers really don't have as strong of a detachment with the agency or familiarity with the agency. So it seems to be the need exists for increasing their familiarity and their connection with your agency. So let's just start with this familiarity side of things. We asked people, how familiar are you with MDC? And you can see just in the statewide data, which includes everyone, that about 35% of people said they're very familiar or extremely familiar with the agency. If we look at those 2 separate groups, though, of the consumptive and non-consumptive group, we have 45% of the consumptive viewers saying they're very familiar or extremely familiar, but only 25% of the non-consumptive viewers. So it's a much smaller portion there, like about half of them. And then likewise, in that non-consumptive group, you see that about half of them are saying they have no familiarity at all or very slight familiarity with the agency. Another way that we looked at familiarity was with logo recognition. And your state agency did have high logo recognition. We did not quiz people about which one was your actual logo, but we asked them, have you seen the logo before? And you can see, again, that pattern, though, is holding that consumptive viewers are more likely to have seen your logo before than non-consumptive viewers, but still high proportion for both of them. But more differences do emerge when we compare their experiences with your programs, services, and involvement in financial contributions. So let me share some of that with you. So we came up with a list of programs and services working with that stakeholder group that Jess mentioned at the beginning. And we strove to have a list of programs and services that worked across all of the country. So these are general in some ways, and Jess and Amy and others had the opportunity to tell us not to include certain things on this list if they just weren't even an option within your state. You can see that information and nature education and visitor centers are the key ways that consumptive and non-consumptive viewers are interacting with your agency. But if we look across every single one of those bars, you'll notice there's stars related to all of them. So there's always a significant difference between that consumptive and non-consumptive group. And in every case, the consumptive group is involved more in utilizing programs and services than the non-consumptive group. And then if we look at that last bar, which is the one spot where you see it shift, of no MDC programs or services used in the last 5 years, we have almost 50% of non-consumptive viewers saying they haven't utilized any of the programs or services that MDC offers that were given on this list, whereas it's only about 25% of consumptive viewers. So again, we see a twofold difference. And then finally, I want to look at the financial piece. We know from other research that we've done that there's a connection from familiarity and involvement in utilizing services of a state agency with also contributing financially to that agency. So we looked at these financial contributions in two categories. One, a non-voluntary type contribution of where someone needs to spend money in order to be able to get involved in their recreational activity or use a certain piece of land. So I'll show you some examples of that in a moment here. And then we have, in contrast, voluntary contributions where people are not required to contribute to a state agency in order to participate in the activity. So in terms of non-voluntary contributions to your state agency, the two that we looked at were fishing license and hunting license. We did not look at sales tax because the assumption was that everyone in Missouri would be involved in contributing to your state agency through sales tax, because it is something that everyone does in their daily life is purchase things. But fishing and hunting licenses, not everyone does. So non-voluntary, but tied to recreation here. And you can see, again, not surprising because these are tied to consumptive recreation, that the consumptive wildlife viewers were higher on fishing licenses and hunting licenses. The non-consumptive viewers were lower. Now you may be saying, why are non-consumptive viewers ever purchasing licenses? Great question. It may be that they've been purchasing it for someone else in their family, even though they didn't report actually participating in the activity, or they may have purchased it with the intention to participate in the activity and then never did. So that's how they ended up in the non-consumptive group. Or they may have been purchasing it in order to benefit your state agency or to have access to other opportunities that only come to hunters and anglers. Okay, so now let's look at those voluntary ways that people can contribute. So in terms of getting financial products from the state agency, that was where we saw the top level of engagement with this financial opportunities. I do want to point out two key trends that you can see across all of these. One is much lower participation across all groups. The highest one here, that tangible products, is still just at 30% for consumptive viewers. In contrast here, where you had 75% of consumptive viewers purchasing a license in the last 5 years for fishing. The other thing that I wanted to point out is, again, we see consumptive viewers are higher. So even for these voluntary contribution opportunities, consumptive viewers are more likely to contribute to your agency. Not surprising though, because they also have more familiarity with the agency and they're also interacting with you and benefiting from programs and services from your agency even more. And then there's also differences in consumptive and non-consumptive viewers when we think about their perceptions of your agency. So we were interested in people's perceptions of how the agency is currently prioritizing supporting wildlife viewers. And I'll say this is a good news one. We've got a funny typo here. Instead of BOMO, it's supposed to say about, so sorry about that. But 70% of statewide consumptive and non-consumptive viewers are saying the state agency is doing about the right job of engaging with wildlife viewers. And then you see about 25% of the state, regardless of whether we're looking at statewide consumptive or non-consumptive groups, say it's not enough. So a quarter of people want to see more done for wildlife viewers. And then very few viewers think that it's too much. So I think this is good news for you in terms of what you're doing right now is not problematic to anyone, but there are about 25% of people who'd like to see you doing even more. Developing financial contribution opportunities for the future. We have some insights on this because we asked people about what would they be interested in contributing to in the future. Key thing that came across here is that the demand is higher or the interest is higher than what is currently happening for contributions. Fishing license, 60% of people across the board, so that is about similar to what we saw. But having a land access permit or having a fee for a program or event was something that was of interest to about 50% of the population. We also saw about 56% of people saying they'd be interested in tangible products compared to about the 30% or less that were currently purchasing them or had in the past 5 years. We asked about a lottery ticket option. We know it's not always possible in all states, but that is something that we asked across all of the surveys, 50% of people saying that they would contribute in that way. And then 40% saying they'd be interested in a direct donation to the state agency. Now, let's dig into that piece and just broadly contributions a little bit more. We found in our work in Virginia, where we did focus groups, that viewers said to us, we'd be more likely to give money to the state agency if we knew it wasn't going to the general fund, but instead was going towards something that we were interested in seeing a state agency do. So with our stakeholder advisory group, we brainstormed, or I should say our steering committee, we brainstormed what are ways the state agency might designate money that could be of interest to wildlife viewers. So that's the list that you see here. Things like supporting conservation of rare vulnerable species, or supporting conservation of species that are used for viewing or of interest for viewing, or supporting education and outreach related to conservation. And we then asked people for that whole list, would knowing that your money went to those types of services or opportunities increase how much you contributed to the agency? And you can see that, about 30% of people are saying, yeah, across the board, that would make me very likely or extremely likely to give money to the agency. And really for most of these, it's 25% or less were saying that they'd be not at all likely. So I think it is worthwhile for your agency, if you are thinking about trying to increase contributions from people who are involved in wildlife viewing, to think about ways that those funds could be designated that would be of interest to viewers. And this here gives you some insights that maybe support of conservation of rare vulnerable species might be the top priority, although many of these are of interest to a lot of people and would increase their likelihood of contributions. In line with this sort of approach, the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources created an opportunity in their state based upon the results I said that we had from the focus groups with them. And they tried to create a program that was targeted towards wildlife viewers broadly, and also other people with wildlife interests who may not have a way to contribute to the agency right now. And wildlife viewers can buy the Restore the Wild membership or get involved in the membership. And it's more than a specific pass or more than an access pass. So yes, you do get access to wildlife management areas and boating areas, but you also are contributing to the agency, and there's different donation levels. And you also know that your funds from this go specifically for habitat conservation projects, and they report back to wildlife viewers or anyone who's bought a Restore the Wild permit or membership on those habitat projects each year. So there's really that accountability and showing that, yes, those funds do go to benefit people. So that's something that could be thought about in your state if this was of interest. And again, this write-up on this is in the national and regional report as one of our case studies in the recommendations section. All right, so those are my key insights that I have for you. I just want to talk briefly here about what's next for our broader project, things that Missouri can plug into and benefit from if it's of interest to you. We are involved right now in a phase 2 of the project. Part of that phase 2 is we're working with some states. Your state wasn't able to get involved this year, but we're working with some states who are implementing results with specific projects. This can still be really useful to your state agency though, because by next February, we're going to have a website and also presentations at the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Academy that will be held in North Carolina, as well as a webinar about what other state agencies have done. So lots more examples, case studies, and then we're also collecting the resources that they create that will be housed on our website. So hopefully providing ways that other state agencies can do similar sort of work in line with these results that were pretty consistent across state agencies, and try not to have 50 states recreating the wheel, but providing some examples and templates that people can adapt to their own realities in their state and their state agency. Additionally, we're doing further analysis of the national, regional, and state data sets all brought together. So one thing that we're looking at are urban wildlife viewers and how they differ from rural wildlife viewers. State agencies said to us, we'd really like to know how we can work even more with the urban population. And it seems like viewing is a key way to do this. Can you make sure that we have some insights specific to urban areas? As part of that analysis, we're also looking into that access versus awareness issue and looking at where people live based upon where people who view live, based upon what they said about that survey item and also the proximity of viewing areas to them. Additionally, Emily and then also Freya McGregor, who works in our lab, are looking at the data related to accessibility challenges for people who fell into that broader category with a similar definition to disabled wildlife viewers. And then there's plenty of opportunity for others to do more analysis too, related to income level, specialization, age, et cetera. I will say also that we have a graduate student who's looking more at ethno-racial minorities and their connection with needing support from a support network. So all of those things will be coming out in future reports or journal articles that we'll make sure are available to Jess and Amy that they can distribute to others who might be interested. Or if there's one of these specifically of interest to you, feel free to reach out to Emily after the presentation. We also just recently completed a grant proposal for a phase 3 of this project that might be of interest to some of you. A lot of the state agencies that we've worked with said they're particularly interested in that high percentage of people who said that accessibility challenges are limiting the extent to which they're involved in wildlife viewing, and that they would appreciate knowing more about what they could do to really be inclusive and welcoming and ensure that it's possible for disabled wildlife viewers to have high quality viewing experiences on either birding trails or wildlife management areas if your state has them, or other sites where viewers might visit, as well as positive experiences on your website and your communications, et cetera. So in order to accomplish this, we're going to be hosting focus groups across the nation with wildlife viewers who do face accessibility challenges, and hoping to get key insights from them on what are the challenges they're facing, what are strategies that work for them, what are things that agencies could do, and also conducting extensive literature reviews similar to what we did in our past project about viewers, but more broadly to best practices related to working with disabled viewers or recreationists more broadly. And then we'll also be working with state agencies to co-produce recommendations about how to address these challenges within state agencies, and ultimately coming up with a report that provides sort of a menu of things that your state agency might be able to do to have more inclusive wildlife viewing opportunities. So hope that that will be something that could be useful to Missouri should we get funding, which we hope we will hear later this fall, that we'll have the opportunity to work on this project with the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group. Finally, I want to point out that, again, we only scratched the surface of what's here in this report and data set for you. So check out the results in there. If there's something you want to learn more about, take a look. There's an extensive executive summary that within a much shorter length covers the key results if that's something that you want to remind yourself of the key things to take away from it. And the recommendations section at the end is really a great resource to where we pulled a lot of what we have here. And thank you to Jess and Amy and others in the agency who looked through the report for us and also provided feedback to make sure that what we were recommending is relevant to you. So with that, we're going to wrap up here today. Hope that we can answer any questions that anyone has right now, and also provide an opportunity for any dialogue here amongst those on the phone who might want to talk a little bit about what might be next within your state agency. And then, as I mentioned before, Emily's a great resource to reach out to. Also provided my contact information, but Emily is much more responsive than I am, as she spends the majority of her time focused on this project, and I'm spread a bit more thin. And then one last thing that I wanted to say is that Emily has posted in the chat an evaluation form, and then there's also a link to it here. Super short survey. We're interested in what you might take away and do as a result of what you've seen here. Helpful for us as we're thinking about how we continue to work with state agencies to know what you all are considering, and then also any feedback you have for us. So thanks for the time for that. With that, I'll turn it over to Jess to see if, Jess, there's anything that I missed that you wanted to make sure is called out here, or any reflections that you wanted to share before we open up the floor to others.
Sure. I mean, certainly I don't think there's anything you missed. The survey is really extensive. And I think what most interests me now that we see this data is, okay, we've got data from our Conservation Monitor survey that we do once a quarter. We have data from the Pathways to Relevancy survey from last February. And how might the results of this particular survey for wildlife viewing intersect with those other two surveys? Do they differ anywhere? But if we go through and find a number of commonalities, then to me, that would mean, okay, this is really something we need to take a look at doing, so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of ways to combine the results of this survey with the work that we're doing in other areas for relevancy and inclusion and diversity. It's just a matter of kind of sifting through all the information and really figuring out what things we would like to focus on initially.
Great. Thanks so much, Jess. Appreciate your thoughts on that. And I'm glad that you're already thinking about what's next with this. So yeah, it sounds like there's a good plan forward.
Yes.
Anybody else? Feel free to raise your hand, just come off mute, put questions in the chat. We'd love the opportunity to talk a little bit more with you.
Hey, Ashley, can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, this is Nate Minix. I work in our planning section. One of the things that jumped out to me here, first of all, excellent data and excellent research, and thank you for compiling it, putting it together for us and presenting it today. But what really jumped out to me is a lot of what I saw the non-consumptive users asking for as far as things that they would get engaged in. We do offer a lot of that already. And so I'm wondering how we're missing them is a big thing that stands out in my mind. You know, as I guess what's the gap in finding those communities, those people, those networks, is something that we probably need to explore pretty thoroughly, because a lot of these things we do offer, I'm just not sure it's reaching that demographic. And so that's kind of my primary concern.
That's a great point, Nate. So it's like that question of like, is it their awareness, not only of the sites for viewing, but of the opportunities, programs, and services you offer, or financial opportunities, or is it that it's just not there? And if you're seeing that list and you're like, yeah, it is available, reflecting on, is it something that's at a time of day that's possible for people, or at a location that's possible for people, I think is still a good thing to think about. But yeah, thinking about where do we find beginner and novice viewers? Like they've said that they want print materials. So how do you get them out to them? How do you work with community organizations that may not be that high level wildlife viewer, but could be another way to reaching out to people? Like, is it through, the master gardeners and the outreach that they do? Or is it through partnering with another organization that may do more broadly outdoor stuff? Or is it going to some sort of outdoor expo, which you all probably already do? Could be, useful things to think about. Or is it through libraries, a way that you find really broad participation of the public? So I think that's a great thing to think about, and it could also be something that you partner with other organizations with in your state as well, trying to think about how to accomplish that. And it sounds like, through Jess's work, having a relevancy branch at your agency is certainly an awesome resource that majority of state fish and wildlife agencies don't have. And so you do have a group of people who's thinking about this. So those are some ideas off the top of my head. I expect that you've got some people here on the call who are also thinking about that too. But it's a great thing to keep pondering is what we're offering in the places and delivered in the way that can be useful to individuals and overcome those barriers of distance or of cost or of time.
And to add to that, over 50% of wildlife viewers did live in a small city or an urban area. And I'm not familiar with where your programming is, but targeting things towards the cities definitely could reach a lot of people, according to the data.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you all for that.
Sure. And Jess, you're welcome to jump in too if you have other thoughts on that, because I expect something your office thinks about.
No, for sure. What you said is great. I think, we're with our Pathways to Relevancy project, I think I've mentioned to you all before, we're focusing on 18 to 34-year-olds statewide, and then urban Black Americans in Missouri's 4 largest cities, which is St. Louis, Kansas City, Springfield, and Columbia. And so really, if we focus in on those 2 groups, there's nothing to say, oh, we could also include bird watching or wildlife viewing in some of our outreach materials to some of these other groups that we probably aren't doing a great job right now of reaching out to. So I think that this will be quite easy to weave into those target demographics of 18 to 34 and urban Black Americans.
Great. Thanks, Jess. Any other questions? That was a great one, Nate. All right. Well, if there's no other questions or comments here, you've got our email addresses. Of course, know Jess too. And I'm happy to continue the conversation with anyone. And then, like I said, too, another place to hear about more resources that we're creating, if anyone is interested, is the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Academy happening in North Carolina. Next February, we'll also be getting a webinar out there, and we'll make sure that Jess and Amy have that information to broadcast to your agency too. And so we'd be happy to see any of you at any of those opportunities as well.
Well, Ashley and Emily, thank you so much for everything you've done for this project. It's been really a great project. And even knowing that we would have to wait for the results of our state-specific survey for a while, it's actually come much sooner than I thought. It's like, oh, this time went by really quickly. So it is great to now have our state-specific results and really figure out what we can do with that information as we move forward with relevancy initiatives. So thank you both so much.
You're very welcome. It's been great working with you all. Appreciate it. Best of luck, and we look forward to seeing what you accomplish.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining today.